Hello, I'm Skaya, and welcome to Face, our weekly summary of top events from a Central European perspective. Now, my guest today here on TVP World is News Director Adam Jasser. Adam, hello.
Hello.
So we have quite a lot of topics to tackle. I want to begin with the Ukraine corruption bill. It's been quite a heated story here in the past week. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, of course, reversed a controversial law that threatened the independence of Ukraine's anti-corruption agencies. And of course, the move coming after not just Ukraine citizens went on the streets to protest, but also after the EU pushed back on it. Now, a little metaphor I want to tell you here is that Zelenskyy actually rose to power, promising to fight corruption in a show that was called Sluga Naroda. I watched it first initially in Russian. It translates to Servant of the People on Netflix, where he played a teacher who accidentally becomes the president of Ukraine, riding a bicycle to work, avoiding any luxury cars, and he takes on the oligarchs. So my question to you now, don't you think that this recent attempt to weaken anti-corruption agencies actually proved that real politics has actually completely overtaken this idealism that he once portrayed in this show?
I know where you're driving. You're saying, power corrupts. And to a certain degree, yes. I mean, it does corrupt, and we see it not just in Ukraine. We see it in many other places, also in some developed countries. If you look at what is happening to the Trump family, there are some concerns that it's too much of mixing personal gain with being in a position of power. But in Ukraine, the problem is that Zelenskyy's reversal is, of course, a welcome thing, and the European partners and the Ukrainians themselves have welcomed the fact that he made that U-turn. But the damage is done. And I think the perception of Ukraine as a sort of endemically, inherently corrupt country will persist, both at home and abroad.
Why did he do it in the first place? Why make such a decision in the first place? Didn't he think that it would erupt to the scale that it did? I mean, with protests already, you're in a position where you want more funding, you want the eyes, to be on Ukraine. Gaza has shifted that a little bit.
The only plausible explanation, which of course we cannot verify at this stage, is that some of these investigations were beginning to focus on, let's say, his inner circle. And as a matter of fact, the question which remains open is whether the fact that he implemented these measures in the first place, now he reversed them, but the question is, has he already sent a signal to these anti-corruption bodies that be careful if you go after people within my sphere of influence, I will get at you again. So there could be a freezing impact on some of the investigations, if there were any. But this is what many Ukrainians are speculating, and some of the international media. And I think this is a warning for him that there is little patience on the part of the Ukrainian people and Ukraine's key backers in Western Europe to tolerate that.
What about, do you think now it's going to hurt any accession to EU talks?
No, I don't think this is the key issue here. The key issue, the accession talks will either continue or will not continue. And of course, it was easier for the EU now to formulate this in those terms, to say, if you weaken anti-corruption institutions and stop the anti-corruption drive, this will impact your accession negotiations. But it's not just that. It just destroys or maybe damages that's the correct phrasing, damages Ukraine's hopes of becoming a mature Western-style democracy. So it's regardless of whether this affects the EU accession negotiations, which may be difficult anyway, it's just bad for Ukraine. It's bad for Zelenskyy.
Well, you said Western-style democracy, but I mean, from some other examples that we've seen, isn't it interesting how maybe he was slowly getting comfortable in his role as president, or maybe as an authoritarian possible figure? That's what some
I don't believe that narrative. I don't think he has authoritarian instincts, if this is what you're referring to. We also need to in his defense, we need to also say that he's been, leading his nation in really difficult circumstances. But he damaged Ukraine's reputation for sure, and his own personal standing with his people and with some of the Western partners.
Adam, there's a very interesting update, just to shift topics right now, from Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk recently. Now, speaking at the Air Force Institute of Technology in Warsaw, he said that there are many signs that suggest that the war in Ukraine may soon be at least temporarily halted, but warned that even a ceasefire wouldn't change Poland's policy of building up its army, basically saying that a ceasefire could be in place soon. Now, can you possibly provide us with some details about what this actually meant? Do you have some insight?
Well, I certainly have no insights. I certainly have no insights, and I cannot provide you with details. So I can only engage in some guessing here. I think the main message Prime Minister Tusk wanted to deliver is that Poles should not take any, let's say, positive news about the war in Ukraine as the moment when they can relax and forget about the need to be on guard. So, frankly speaking, many people were puzzled by his comments suggesting that there may be a pause in fighting.
Well, I was quite puzzled.
And frankly speaking, as TVP World, we've been trying to get more insight on this from different officials and from analysts, and everybody's saying no. On the contrary, we see Mr. Putin not really ready to bow to even US pressure now. So I think Tusk used that mostly for the domestic audience to say we cannot let our guard down, and don't believe that if the US is successful in the latest round of putting pressure on Putin, we cannot just forget about the risk to Poland and the risk to the eastern flank. I think that was his main message.
But are you saying that in the context of if there were to be a ceasefire, that Poland, for instance, should not let its guard down?
Yes.
So you're saying that the military...
So he's basically saying regardless of what happens in Ukraine, even if there is ceasefire, we have to continue preparing for war. And, it's important to remember that only a couple of days ago, he was playing host to the new Supreme NATO commander in Europe, the American General Grinkiewicz, who must be of Polish origin, I guess, who only a few days earlier made headlines by saying, NATO faces the prospect of a conflict, of a military conflict on NATO's eastern flank, simultaneously with China attacking Taiwan. So, so Tusk is probably just making sure that the Poles understand how tricky and dangerous the situation is.
President Donald Trump...
I hope he's not going to come on the show and say, no, that's completely wrong, your interpretation.
We could get on the show.
Then we would get him on the show, right? That would be nice.
All right, Adam. President Donald Trump, he's known to say major things. But one of the interesting things he said, which has actually shifted from a long time, is he says he's disgusted by Russia's recent events on the aerial attacks on Ukrainian cities. But some critics, of course, argue that he does bear some responsibility for Ukraine's growing vulnerability after 2 years of obstructing U.S. aid. And I see you smiling. I
shouldn't be smiling. It's actually tragic in a sense. But I'm smiling because, on this show and on some other shows, I've been giving Trump the benefit of the doubt when he started this push for a settlement. When he was, I didn't believe that he's going to bring peace to Ukraine on the first day of his presidency or even before
right.
Yeah. I never trusted that, but I thought, yes, maybe, there is a stalemate, obviously, on the battlefield. Ukraine is being exhausted, and if Trump is going to make a genuine push for peace or ceasefire, maybe it's actually good for Ukraine, right? So, whenever this issue came up of Trump's betrayal of Ukraine, if you will, I was trying to suggest that give him some time. He started on this path, so give diplomacy some chance, as they would say. But I was proven wrong for all the obvious reasons, which is that Mr. Putin, President Putin, is simply not interested in peace, which was the argument many experts, many specialists were saying, the members of the previous US administration were saying, top think tankers were saying, even some members of the US administration quietly
that
acknowledged
Putin wasn't
that.
interested in peace.
But Trump wanted to test it himself. You know, this obvious perception of himself as the deal maker made him believe that he can finish this war. And now he's reacting with disappointment. And, you know, he keeps saying he's disappointed with something. He's disappointed with this, he's disappointed with Gaza. Look, the two key promises on foreign policy that he made, the end of the Gaza conflict and the end of the war in Ukraine, both remain unfulfilled. So, in a sense, you know, he's learning the hard way that it's easy to criticize your predecessors for foreign policy failings and then do better than them. Because if you look at what he's doing now, he's actually applying the same tactics as Biden administration, namely salami tactics. So he's going to increase pressure on Russia. He's entering deals with Ukraine. Maybe U.S. arms will flow to Ukraine again in greater volumes and so on and so forth. So he's basically, at the end of the day, he's going to be continuing Biden's policies. But 2 years was lost, because I think it's worth reminding our viewers that because of Trump's opposition to U.S. support for Ukraine, effectively the Biden administration went from for as long as it takes to as long as it is possible.
But I mean, that's not what American taxpayers think. They think that they've helped and aided Ukraine way more than Europe has done.
Yeah, but and Trump peddled that narrative a lot, which is not entirely true, as we know. And he also kept saying that Biden was pushing America towards World War III. Right? And now he's basically 2 years later, he's in the same position as the Biden administration.
But today, another thing that Trump has said and kept his word on, Adam, it's the 1st of August, and these tariffs come into effect. So now EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen meets with US President Donald Trump. And the deal now is that there is a 15% import tariff on most EU goods instead of the 30%, right? Initially threatened by Trump.
Yes.
I do want to quote Polish Premier again, Donald Tusk, who said that American tariffs on European products have become a reality, but you know, there's nothing to be happy about. But then again, why shouldn't Americans be happy about it?
Well, Americans shouldn't be happy because they will pay more for European goods. There's just no way that can be avoided. But that's the price Trump is prepared to pay domestically. What I like about this quote from Prime Minister Tusk is the ending, because one of my favorite sayings is, you know, a piece of something is better than all of nothing. And this is what he basically says here. He says, you know, we could have had a much worse outcome. We could have had 30% tariffs, which, according to most economists and the financial markets, would have been a major blow to Europe, meaning a recession, more jobless, you know, loss of industries and so on and so forth. A 15% tariff on most goods is something Europe can probably live with. So, you know, it's a compromise. It's a compromise that changes the status quo in favor of the United States in that trade relationship, no doubt about it. But again, Europe can live with this overall. And the reason why so many governments choose to criticize the deal is, of course, that they don't want to admit to their own public that they themselves pushed the Commission to accept this deal. Because, frankly speaking, if the European governments were determined not to bow to this pressure and to, let's say, launch counter-tariffs or retaliatory action... So
you think they actually had a choice?
Who? The European leaders? Well, that's what they seem to be implying if they're saying the Commission, you know, got a weak deal. So were they in favor of going full-blown trade war? No, and look, from our region, we have this Hungarian foreign minister, Mr. Szijjártó, who went out and said von der Leyen is a laughingstock because she gave in to Trump, and then he congratulated Trump for winning for America. So is he trying to say that he wanted Ursula von der Leyen to play it tough with his friends in the United States? I mean, it's incoherent.
Today, Poland commemorates the 81st anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising. Adam, you could say it was a brave but tragic attempt to free Warsaw, of course, from Nazi occupation, while Soviet forces watched from across the river. Now, there is a poll that was done by Rzeczpospolita found that 51% of Poles now believe that the uprising was the right decision, compared to just 31% in 2018. I mean, Adam, this is quite a massive shift in public sentiment. And also, President-elect Karol Nawrocki said that German anti-Polonism was at the root of the massacres of civilians, and he went on to a political statement. Now, I want to ask you, how is this shift in sentiment actually today, and also, of course, after Nawrocki, after what he said, shaping today's Polish identity and Polish politics? What are we seeing that has changed?
I think the uprising has been controversial among historians, politicians, and ordinary people ever since it happened. Even the decision to launch the uprising in the final stages of World War II was controversial. Polish authorities at that time in exile were divided on whether to do this because they were aware of the risks. And let's just not forget that the uprising ended in atrocities. Over 200,000 people lost their lives. 700,000 more were expelled from Warsaw, and some of them were killed in German concentration camps.
So why no reparations for Poland?
And the entire city was demolished by the Germans after the population was expelled. So it's a huge tragedy in Poland's history.
Where are the reparations?
Well, Poland officially ceased claims to reparations when it was under the Soviet sphere of influence. So, on legal grounds, there is very little scope. And look, no Polish government, including Mr. Nawrocki's allies in law and justice, made any effort to file any complaint before any international court on this issue. So it's more a question of a moral obligation and compensation rather than reparations.
Okay, but I mean, this
which
issue
is fair enough.
This issue is still very much alive, right? And there's a lot of, anti-German sentiment.
Yes, and this is the poll
today.
because I mean, some politicians in Poland, many politicians in Poland, are using this to invoke the German crimes during Second World War, which Germany doesn't deny, to use for current political disputes with Germany, which is a paradoxical situation because, Germany these days looks at international relations, particularly at the security situation and Russia, with the Polish spectacles, if you will. So they basically see it the Polish way. And that was a major problem where Poland and Germany had different views on how to handle Russia, how to handle Ukraine. Today, we see eye to eye on these issues. And instead of trying to build on that, a lot of the Polish political establishment is bringing this issue up and basically making it more difficult for these two countries, these two neighbors, partners in NATO and the European Union.
Okay,
to work
Adam,
together.
so you're saying that Poland should no longer act, okay, you said possible compensation, but I mean, if we talk about, let's take Israel. Israel received, if I'm not mistaken, around $1 billion from Germany, right?
Right.
In reparations. So why not Poland? I'm going to ask you this, this question again. I mean, they don't want, it's one thing where Germany recognizes, what they did. So Israel gets that.
Please don't understand me wrong.
Why not Poland?
I'm not saying that Germany shouldn't be doing something in terms of compensation. And the offers that the Germans have made so far, they all look mediocre and humiliating to Poland. But there is also, at the same time, a concerted effort by the far right, by anti-German parties to whip up this sentiment and to use it for current political needs. And that is not ultimately serving Poland's objectives, I think. Mixing history and current politics, I mean, we're 80 years away from this. And there's one more thing. Germany was Poland's enemy at that time, but we also had allies. The United States, Britain.
Right.
And what did they do to help the uprising succeed? Absolutely nothing. The US president effectively betrayed Poland. The UK, Britain, effectively betrayed Poland back then and let it pass into the Soviet sphere of influence. And we don't talk about that. We focus on Germany's guilt, which was admitted many times, which the Germans keep repeating, but they try to tie it with the reparations issue, which was closed many, many years ago. Even Law and Justice, the opposition, the current opposition, admitted, well, you can always file a motion in the court, but for some reason nobody does it.
And we should probably put it out there. Adam, thank you so much for watching Face to Face. I'm Skaya. We'll see you next week, and stay with us here on TVP World for more news and analysis.